Hello. Uh, Today we start with the 26th module of the course in Applied Linguistics of the E-Pathshala program of the UGC in Linguistics. The 6th module is concerned with some very important social psychological aspects involved in learning a language, particularly in learning a second language or a third language or a foreign language. You see, there are a set of variables like your age, your gender, your socioeconomic background, about which we can't do much. You come to the classroom with a certain social, psychological, economic baggage, and there is nothing one can do about that. Or it's a much larger macro issue. But so far the school and the classroom are concerned, there are a whole range of individual variables which are also called learner variables, which include variables like attitudes, motivation, personality traits, learning styles and learning strategies, which we can work upon in a variety of different ways. In peer groups, in teacher-child interaction, you can do quite a lot in once we realize what is the significance of these variables, then you can encourage children to learn more and more language if you understand these variables. I mean, if they are more positively inclined. So one of the more important variables which people think is very important, which I don't think is so important, is the variable of aptitude. So you must have heard people saying, oh, she can learn many languages, she has a flair for languages, or she has an aptitude for languages. But I think it's important to understand, and throughout the modules we have tried to emphasize that irrespective of who you are, where you are born, and whether you are a male or a female, whether you are poor or you are rich or middle class, you have almost democratically, optimally distributed language faculty. And all of us can learn languages, have the same aptitude, have the same capacity to learn languages. However, there are some children who in the beginning perform better, and some take a little bit of time. I mean, there is no doubt about that, if particularly in the case of second language or a foreign language. We have also tried to show you again and again that disability is not an issue in this area, and that we should begin to think of an inclusive society. I have been emphasizing this point, that hearing, visual, orthopedic, or any other kind of impairment, unless it's a major cognitive deficit, is not an impediment to learning one or several languages. Consider the case of attitudes. It has been shown, I mean, two people whom we think of again and again in this respect are Gardner and Lambert, who wrote the famous book called Attitudes and Motivation in Second Language Learning. So if you have more positive attitudes towards the second or the third or the foreign language and to its speakers, you are likely to learn the language better and faster, and your proficiency levels are going to be higher. And this certainly is an area where teachers and peer group interaction and parents can make a lot of contribution, because in terms of attitudes, people have very commonly held belief systems. Like you must have heard people saying, oh, Urdu is a very sweet language, or French is a very sweet language. Tamil, is very harsh. It's like pieces of stone in a tin drum or something like that. Or some other, I mean, I'm just giving you some example. Or this is not a language, this is khichdi. Or this is not a language, this is a dialect. So all these things go on to make the attitudes toward the target language or language in general negative. So it's possible to work in small groups, in peer group interaction, and through various activities to show that there is no merit in such belief systems. Teachers can certainly play a significant role in this matter. Another social psychological variable or learner variable that Gardner and Lambert isolated was the variable of motivation, and they distinguished between 4 different kinds of motivation. We don't talk of all the 4 these days, we talk only of 2, but initially in their book they proposed 4 different motivations, and they were integrative, instrumental, resentment, and manipulative. So let's sort of sort out the ones which have now been dismissed more or less, but nonetheless I think they are important. Some children, like many of us, end up learning English quite well out of sheer resentment. We don't like it, we are not motivated to learn, we don't have particularly positive attitude toward the language, but we are sent to schools where you have to learn English. It's a compulsory subject, you have to pass and you have to learn. So that's a kind of out of resentment you end up learning. Over a period of time you may start enjoying it, you may start having positive attitudes to the language. That's quite possible. You may start liking the literature, but the initial motivation might be resentment. But people did not work too much on the resentment motivation. Someday we might. The other kind of motivation, which is not much referred to in literature these days, is called the manipulative motivation. That you can learn a language just a little bit to manipulate people or to manipulate a community. A set of medical representatives may not know too much English, but they pick up a few slang, few sort of technical words, few medical terminology to impress a doctor that this is the medicine that he or she should be using, etc. But the real motivations that Gardner and Lambert talked about were integrative and instrumental. Now, integrative motivation, as I think I tried to explain earlier also, is the motivation when you learn a second language because your attitudes to the second language are very positive, and you really want to learn the language because you want to become a part of the L2 community. So if you want to learn French because you want to become a member of the French speaking community, then your motivation is integrative, right? But if you learn a language, let's say to get a job or for travel and tourism or to read literature, that means for specific purpose, then your motivation is called instrumental, right? So these are the 4 major types of motivation, and out of these, the major hypothesis that Gardner and Lambert put forward was that it is the motivational orientation which is most successful, which is the strongest. And they said that the motivational orientation would consist of it will consist of motivational orientation, and it was sort of conceptualized as consisting of 3 different components. One was integrative orientation, attitude toward the language teaching situation, and motivational intensity. Motivational intensity was measured in terms of how much time do you spend in learning a second language, how much time do you devote, and orientation was what are your attitudes towards the language or towards the. So that was the orientation. The interesting thing is that all this was proposed in the context of French and English in the city of Montreal or in the region of Quebec in Canada, where they found that integrative motivation was far more successful than any other kind of motivation. But the moment they stepped out of the Western world and they went to Philippines, they realized that it was the instrumental motivation which is far more significant. And we have done a series of studies in India. You will find a mention of some of these studies in the module, I think, where it was found that it is the instrumental motivation which leads to higher proficiency levels than the integrative motivation. Then there is the whole question of the learning styles. You know, what is your learning style in the case of a given language, and that seems to influence. And in recent times, the research on learning styles, you know, whether your style is sort of synthetic or analytical, whether your approach to the learning is visual or non-visual, you know, is tactile. For example, you feel a lot more. Sometimes, you know, you remember things by saying, oh, there was that picture, you know, there was something written below that picture, and that is how you remember that. Sometimes you say, oh, there was something, it was at the bottom of the page, that's where it was. So your visual style is far more powerful. That means in terms of physiologically, you are physiologically programmed to have that kind of learning style. Or you can have a learning style which is, you know, the slide is on your screen about the learning styles, and I'm going to read a part of that slide. So you will see that the learning style may also involve another parameter of personality trait. Now, some people are extroverted and some people are introverted. So people who are extroverted, that means people who are extroverts, will automatically seek more language exposure. Those who are introvert, we will have to make a little more effort to provide them language exposure. Okay, but both can. I mean, the learning situation, the teaching materials, and the teacher have to be sensitive to the difference between the learning styles. Then, if you see the third parameter, and that is the parameter is cognitive, which can be, there are learners who tend to focus on the whole before they get to the parts, right? And there are others who go step by step. So you can either be synthetic or you can be analytical. Imagine that if you are given a picture story, so you can approach a picture story in two ways. You look at the whole picture in one go. You don't look at each part, and you don't start describing each picture individually in a linear and an additive fashion and then create a story. You look at the whole set and then start writing the story. Synthetic style, global style. But you can have an analytical style that you go one by one, build the story brick by brick by brick, and then create the wall. Both are equally good, but they are different. And different kinds of approaches have to be created for people with different kinds of learning styles. There is also the issue of learning strategies. You know, how do you, what kind of strategies do you use for learning? For example, you know, one of the strategies of learning is what is called wholesale syncretism. Wholesale syncretism means that you know a few words like I know, you know, so no, what about, you know, I'm okay, I think, and you keep using these expressions just to sound that you know English. I often quote the case of one of my aunts who had learned the word clever in English, and she would say, very clever man, very clever person, that's very clever, so much, but she hadn't worked out the difference between clever, cunning, or ripe. So the day she came across a mango which was far too ripe and was not worth eating, she said, this mango is very clever, you know, this mango is very clever, that means it's far too ripe. So this is sort of extending the use of the term, and people use this. So the other learning strategies which are on your screen are sort of, you know, code mixing, code switching. People use that very often, you know, that you can mix codes. मेरे पिताजी काम करते हैं and my brother too. Now that's a very complex kind of code quote mixing. Or I remember a sentence from my data, Usha to na aaj pudine ki chutney made. Oh, another kind. So all these are strategies which should not be looked down upon. These are strategies which are steps which take you forward towards more and more learning. So finally, we can talk about the multilingual classroom that we have been talking about. And I have talked about the multilingual classroom in two different ways. One, that it builds meta-linguistic awareness. It builds your sensitivity to other languages. Okay, you can use all the languages available in the classroom as a resource, collect data on any specific topic and build on it, and ask students to classify, categorize, generalize, make hypotheses, make rules, and ask them to test. All this is leading towards meta-linguistic awareness, which means awareness about language structure. It's very preliminary. It's not teaching great grammar, but it certainly means that you are more sensitive to grammatical structures and you are more sensitive to the other languages present in the classroom. So that is what I call multilinguality. Because of that multilinguality, you can create that kind of awareness, and it has been shown that higher the levels of your meta-linguistic awareness, higher will be the levels of your language proficiency. You can also use the multilingual classroom to build language proficiency through, sort of tasks like translation, like code switching, code mixing, using poetry in different ways, role play, changing one kind of genre into another kind of genre. Imagine reading a short story in English and writing a short Hindi play on the basis of it. I think this is an enormous task, worthwhile undertaking in class 7, 8 or 9 or 10, which will bring out the most important aspects of language proficiency at the level of discourse, at the level of sentences, and at the level of lexicon.